Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this series of talks on quality management systems. And today we are going to be discussing on facilities and safety. And despite the nature of work undertaken, for example, handling infectious material, laboratories should be safe places for staff and visitors alike. The physical containment of the laboratory, worker safety, and ergonomics are key considerations in facilities and safety. And procedures and standards ensure a safe, secure, and clean environment. The learning objectives for this podcast today are you should be able to one, relate how facility design impacts the efficiency and safety of laboratory workers, describe practices to prevent or reduce risks, list personal protective equipment PPEs that should be used routinely by laboratory workers, explain general safety requirements for the laboratory, and lastly, describe steps to take in response to emergencies such as biological or chemical spills or laboratory fires. I would like to lay out a scenario for you to think about and even discuss at the end of this podcast. Your laboratory specializes in virology. There's an epidemic of SARS-CoV-2 in your country, and the Ministry of Health names your laboratory as the reference laboratory for processing all samples. Your laboratory specializes in virology. There is an epidemic of SARS-CoV-2 in your country, and the Ministry of Health names your laboratory as the reference laboratory for processing all samples. Question: what are the elements to consider ensuring biosafety in your laboratory? What are the elements to consider ensuring biosafety in your laboratory? Now, laboratory accidents happen. However, rarely they do happen. So, what are the secondary effects of a laboratory accident? There is loss of staff confidence, loss of reputation, loss of customers, and increased costs via litigation and insurance. Bottom line is, negligence of laboratory safety is costly. Whose responsibility is it for quality and safety? Everyone in the laboratory is responsible for quality and safety. It is not the biosafety officer's job. It is not the lab director, lab manager, or section heads, or management. This is everybody's responsibility. If one person is not safe, then everybody is not safe. All diagnostic and healthcare laboratories must be designed and organized for biosafety level 2 or above. For obvious reasons that these laboratories are handling potentially infectious material, and the nature of the equipment that are in these laboratories behoves that they should be organized for BSL 2 or above. Now let's discuss a little bit about lab design. The important thing to think about is the path followed by the sample. That is reception and registration of patients, sampling rooms, dispatch between different laboratories, and analysis of samples. Where is the sample received? How is it registered? How are the patients registered? Is it via paper or is it via a lab information management system? For obvious reason, a LIMS is better than hard copies. The sample drawing rooms, are they safe for the patient? Are they safe for the worker? Are they safe for is it safe for the environment? How are the samples shipped between different laboratories? And how are the samples analyzed? whether real time or delayed time. How are the reports delivered? What is the filing system and the service rooms? These are all points to consider when you're designing the laboratory. When you look at the doors, are the doors opening inwards or outwards? For safety reasons, the doors should open outwards and there should be a crash bar on the inside so that it becomes easy for people to escape from the laboratory. There should not be equipment or obstacles in the hallways, and there should be enough space between the aisles, a minimum of 1 meter between the aisles. And the registration desk should not have any clutter. It should have a reception window or a drop box, one way, where the samples are brought in and put in the pass-through box. And after that, the people in the lab either are notified by a bell or any other method for them to know that as there's a sample in the pass-through box that they can receive, and then register the sample before the sample is shipped to the various processing desks. During service, the safety procedures to consider is that extremely important that no unauthorized persons should access the laboratory at any time. No friends, nor children, and most definitely no animals should access the laboratory. We must close the doors at all times. And as indicated that the doors should have a crash bar from the inside, the doors should either be glass throughout or half glass, that the person working on the inside and the person outside are able to see each other, and we are able to observe what is happening in the laboratory. As I said earlier, the sample collection room must be clean, must be airy, and we may be collecting extremely pathogenic samples, like for example, MTB, samples which are suspected of MTB. So even the direction of airflow is very important in this situation. And the sample collection room should not have immediate access for the customers to enter the laboratory. And there must be segregated areas for particular processes that are taking place in the laboratory. Like, for example, dedicated areas for hematology, for blood sampling, gynecology sampling, stock control, media preparation room, washing area, autoclaving or sterilization room, bacteriology or parasitology room. All of these areas should be clearly demarcated and to take into consideration the workflow and how the sample from the reception area to the discarding of the sample goes through. That the sample should not be going back and forth like spaghetti, but go from one end to the other one, directly from reception to the death of the sample through either sterilization or archiving of the sample in the freezers. The stockroom should also be arranged in such a way that it is clear at first glance. The first in, first out principle must be maintained. All the bottles must be clearly marked using Sharpie pens, the expiry date, the reception date, opening date, and the technician who opened that bottle. And from the door, it should be very easy to see everything that is in the stockroom. And then the mixture of things should not be done. You should know that, on the top left you have this item, on the top right you have this item, on the bottom right you have this item, on the middle you have this item, on this shelf you have that item. And it is good to have bin cards also to control the inventory in that room. Minimum stocks should be held in the laboratory. The doors, as I indicated, should be opening to the outside, and the doors should be large enough to allow the entry and removal of large pieces of equipment. Now, important that when we work in the laboratory, we will be generating waste. And it is critical to segregate this waste into biological waste, chemical waste, office waste, domestic waste, so that we know very clearly how to handle these different wastes and how to dispose of them. The premises, I prefer, should have a high ceiling minimum of 3 meters high, for obvious reason, to improve the ventilation, to also improve on the aura and the work conditions of the lab. The walls and ceiling should be made of washable glossy paint, which are easy to clean and disinfect. The floor should also be easy to clean and disinfect. And if possible, if resources allow, the floors should be of epoxy. That is very easy to clean and disinfect. The bench tops, when you're designing the bench tops, you must take care not to use wood nor steel, because wood or steel will contain, will be corroded and will contain microorganisms, and this may expose and will expose the people working in the laboratory to biological hazards. The bench top should be non-porous covering, should be easy to clean, and resistant to chemicals and disinfectants. And the bench tops should take into consideration the average height of the people working in that laboratory. And also the spacing should also take into consideration the ease of movement between work areas, like for example, the biosafety cabinet and other equipment. And as I indicated earlier in this talk, that take into consideration the path of the workflow. That it should not be in a zigzag pattern, that you go from one corner to the other one and you make people tired the whole day, but should be smooth. Even after we have designed the spaces, we have installed the equipment, we have installed the bench tops, and all of this, we must have scheduled cleaning to ensure that we are working in a clean environment. There should be daily cleaning of bench tops and floors. And I always insist, it is not the work of the janitor to clean the bench tops. It is our job. And I've always demonstrated this, and I've shown leadership as a lab director to clean the bench tops, to clean the floors, because the janitors do not have the training to be able to do this. So that we should do that daily. On a weekly basis, we should be cleaning the ceilings and the walls and other large equipment like refrigerators, freezers, storage areas, and we must record the date and time and who cleaned this. Now, I said earlier that it is the responsibility of everybody working in the lab to ensure the safety of the premises. However, there will be a designated safety officer, and this safety officer must have a delegation memo that has been drawn up and signed by the lab director or the lab manager, indicating very clearly the roles and responsibilities of the safety officer. There should also be a safety manual which is laboratory specific, and standard operating procedures that have been developed by the people working in those particular areas, and they should not only be developed but should also be used. It is your job as the safety officer and as a designee of the lab director to ensure that these standard operating procedures are adhered to. The personnel must also be trained on the potential risks and the safety procedures. And as I said a few minutes ago, waste management is also very critical. How many times in a day or in a week is the waste removed from the lab space, and how is it disposed of? General safety equipment like emergency showers, emergency eye wash stations must be available and must be tested on a weekly basis, that they are not only working, but they are working at the designated 15 psi per minute for a minimum of 15 minutes. And there should be a form there to indicate that they are working. You, as the lab lead, you should also be able to test this equipment at random without anybody knowing that you're going to test it. And the smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, the correct personnel protective equipment must also be made available and tested at designated intervals. Do not, I repeat, do not have any mouth procedures in the lab, like pipetting, eating, drinking, smoking, or applying makeup in the laboratory. These are simply not allowed because these are extremely high risk procedures that can bring fatalities in the laboratory. We are also encouraged to work safely, like all procedures that are open, for example, in microbiology, to handle all these procedures inside a biosafety cabinet, washing our hands in designated wash and sink areas, and chaining of the gas cylinders, disposal of biological waste, chemical waste, and ensuring that the appropriate biohazard signs are in place. Safe autoclaving is also very critical, and wearing of the correct personnel protective equipment. Safety signs, like for example, the ISO 3864 safety sign formats indicate, like for example, the warning signs, a prohibition sign, or mandatory action sign, and safety information sign, like for example, the wearing of mufflers, which way is the exit, which biohazard level is contained in that particular space. All of this must be put in place. Now, after doing all of that, we need to perform a risk assessment. What are the risks and what are the mitigations that we put in place to mitigate against those risks? So why do it? Published research, which is not very recent, between 1993 and 1997, that's about from 30 years ago, and these figures may possibly have gone up exponentially from that time, indicate that laceration is the biggest source of injury for lab employees at 32%. Bruises, sprains, and strain fractures at 21%, and chemical exposure, eye injuries, repetitive stress, needle puncture, animal bites consist of the other ones. And between 1993 and 1997, figures from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Office of Lab Safety indicates bruises and sprains and fractures are almost 57% of the lab support injuries. And the repetitive stress, 17%, lacerations, 13%, and others, like chemical exposure, burns, and eye injury. So lab hazards could be physical, could be chemical, could be biological. All of these three areas need mitigation. They need risk assessment and mitigation measures on how we are going to handle them. For accidents and injuries, these can occur through needles and syringes, broken glass, sharps, aspiration through pipettes, which I said should not be allowed in the laboratory, spills and sprays, or bites and scratches from animals or ectoparasites. The physical hazards could be explosion from autoclaves, could be from Bunsen burners, which should not actually be used in the laboratory now, could also be from micropipetter in semi-automated or automated equipment, could also be from automated equipment like microbiological equipment or ELISA machines. All of this consists of physical hazards that can happen in the laboratory. Especially some of these equipment are very heavy, and if they're not contained properly in the laboratory, there is a possibility of them falling down and causing severe to fatal injuries. Needles and broken glass and sharps are also a major source of injury, and we are required that we do not recap needles at any time. We should always use puncture-resistant, leak-proof sharps containers, and always use specific waste disposal containers. Never directly handle broken glass. Ladies and gentlemen, it only takes one accident for you to become history. And as I always say, indeed, we will say that you are a great worker, we will miss you, the gap you have left is too big to be filled, but at the same time, your lab director will write a request letter to the human resource to request for your replacement immediately. So take care of yourself and take care of your colleagues to ensure that you do not recap needles, you dispose of glassware safely and even needles safely. We must have biosafety level 1 and 2 cabinets for storage, for spill containing the cabinet, hazardous waste storage, and flammable liquids storage. These must be under lock and key, and an inventory log sheet must be available for the workers to indicate what is in those cabinets, what has been taken out, and what is remaining. So that if there is an unscheduled audit that may be conducted within the lab or externally, we can know exactly what is contained in there. And we should also have material safety data sheets, not just have them and file them, but ensure that we read them and we use them and update them as the safety requirements change from time to time. Now, what are the risks for laboratory workers for most frequently reported infections in the United States, for example? Between 1979 and 1999, a 20-year period, MTB caused 223 lab infections. Q fever caused 176, hepatitis B virus caused 84, Brucella species caused 81, Salmonella species caused 66, Shigella species caused 56 infections, Hep B, hepatitis non-A, non-B caused 28 infections, and Cryptosporidium species caused 27 infections. These give a total of about 1,074 cases over the 20-year period. Now, these could just be numbers, but these are our colleagues who are working in the lab. These are just reported infections, but don't show the fatality. How many of these progress from cases to fatalities? Biological hazards could result from improper working in biosafety cabinets through aerosols and droplets, which are the main source of contamination. And we must ensure that even while we're working in the biosafety cabinet has been serviced, is working properly, and we know how to power it up and how to power it down. Now, as we discussed about the number of infections, we should also look at the single source multiple lab infections as reported by Redman and Wednam in 1956. This is about more than 50 years ago. Things like brucellosis. The probable source was from centrifugation. The maximum distance from the source to the person being infected was basement to third floor, so that's about 12 meters high, and the number of infected were 94. Coxsackie virus infection resulted from spilled tube of infected mouse tissue on the floor, and the maximum distance from source was estimated at 5 feet, and 2 people were infected. Tularemia. This resulted from 20 petri dish plates which were dropped from a distance of 70 feet, and 5 people were infected. Venezuelan encephalitis resulted from 9 lyophilized ampules which were dropped on the floor, and from a distance of 3rd or 5th floor to 4th floor. So you're talking about 3 floors, and the number of people infected were 24. Even when we are handling everyday equipment like microscopes, we can get contamination through the ocular infection, through inhalation, ingestion, and skin penetration. So we have to be very careful, ladies and gentlemen, when we are handling these equipment, which we think that we are so well versed with handling. We don't clean them between users, and we think we trust the users, but we don't know what they are infected with. We must wear personal protective equipment. Not only wear them, but use them properly. Things like lab coats, gloves. Don't wear gloves that are smaller or larger than your hands. Wear that fit snugly. Goggles or face shield are a must to protect our eyes and our face from sprays. And hearing protection where the sound levels are deemed to be high. For chemical spills, nothing is too small. There could be minor spills, there could be major spills, but anything beyond a minor spill and requiring help from outside of the laboratory group constitutes a major spill. And these must be reported to the lab manager and the lab director. And the biosafety officer then will advise on the appropriate containment, whether this is going to be done in-house or is going to be done externally. The same with biological spills. Ensure that this is reported, it is contained properly, and the right procedure following the standard operating procedures are followed to ensure that these are contained and cleaned properly. There must be regular training provided by competent personnel, either internally or externally, on the use of the appropriate fire extinguishers, and these fire extinguishers must be serviced and log the inspection record indicated for each of these cylinders. Now, in summary, when designing a laboratory organizing workflow, you must ensure that patients and patient samples do not have common pathway. This brings us to the end of today's podcast on facilities and safety. And I want to emphasize one more time that this responsibility for safety in the premises is the responsibility for everybody working in the laboratory. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You can get in touch with me via my email address, joundo664@gmail.com or joundo@hotmail.com. Thank you for the comments that you have been sending me and the questions. I hope that the questions, the responses that I've given to your questions are satisfactory. Please visit my YouTube channel and look at this and let me know your thoughts. Let's meet next week for another podcast. Thank you and bye-bye for now.